This video is going to cover the distance formula. So in order to find the distance, or in other words, the space between two locations, I'm going to use the following formula. The distance is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1, in parentheses, and we square that, plus y2 minus y1 squared. And I'm going to take a square root of all of that. Please pause this video, take a second to write that down. We are going to reference this equation many, many times, so it's important that you have it written down so that you can use it. All right, now that you have it written down, we're going to go over our first example. So you'll notice I have the formula written down. Every time I do this problem, until I've done it enough times that it's memorized, I can use this formula to help me remember. So I want to calculate the distance between the following points. C, which is at negative 2, 2, you can see that here, and 2, negative 6, which you can see here. Now, in a previous lesson, we discussed how to use the Pythagorean theorem to find, so if this is the distance that I want between C and F, to draw in a horizontal and a vertical. Now that option is always viable, but what happens when our points are so far apart on the graph that we can't find those distances? Well, we use this distance formula. So let's practice it with some smaller numbers so that we can apply it with some larger numbers. The very first thing that I want you to do is make sure you're taking notes with me and copy down these 2 points. Now that I have these 2 points written down, I am going to, and I'm going to zoom in so I can see them, I'm going to label them. Remember that in a coordinate, the first is the x and the second part of the point is the y. And I'm going to do that for both points. Also remember that if this is my first point and this is my second point, well, I need a way to tell the difference between each of the x's and each of the y's. And because this is my first point, I'm going to put a little subscript of 1. And because this is my second point, I'm going to put a little subscript of 2. Now notice above in the equation that I have this little x2 that I just wrote down here. I have the x1 that I wrote down here. So just like with any formula, what I'm going to do is replace in my formula x2 and x1 and y2 and y1, because I can see all of those values down here, and replace them. So let's go ahead and yes, please do this with me. So D is equal to the square root of, and I'm going to put parentheses, and in the parentheses I'm going to have x2. So I'm going to find x2, here it is, and I'm going to replace x2 with 2 minus x1. So minus a negative 2. Notice that I included this minus sign right here, and this other second negative is from the negative 2. The formula says to square that, plus, and then parentheses, I'm going to take my second part of my equation. Y2 matches with negative 6 minus, because that's part of my equation, y1, which is 2 squared. So let's go ahead and simplify. 2 minus a negative 2 is like saying 2 plus 2. And remember, you can always use a calculator. 2 minus negative 2 is, and you can see 4 squared. And I'm going to bring down the parentheses and the squared and the square root sign. Negative 6 minus 2, you can plug it in again if you need to. Negative 8 squared. Now, I'm going to continue to follow my order of operations. Order of operations that I did the the parentheses first, which I did. Now to do the exponents. So remember, 4 squared is the same as 4 times 4, so 16. And negative 8 squared is the same as negative 8 times negative 8, which is 64. Now, one thing I want to bring to your attention, if you type it in a calculator, I can type in 2 squared and it's going to give me, sorry, not 2 squared, 4 squared, pardon me. Now I can type in 4 squared, and the exponent button is over here on the left-hand side at the top. 4 squared gives me a 16, just like I thought. Now be careful. If I type in -8 squared without the parentheses, you'll notice that my answer gives me -64. That is incorrect. -8 times -8 is not -64, it's +64. So how do I get it to give me the right answer? I need to put any negatives in parentheses. -8 squared is 64. So just be aware that that's a problem you may run into. You get a question wrong, double check that you put that negative in parentheses. So to finish up, the square root of what is 16 plus 64? Well, 16 plus 64 is a grand total of 80. Now, this is the exact answer, but we are going to approximate it because this asks me to round your answer to the nearest hundredth. That is 2 decimal places. 2 decimals. So I'm going to go back to my calculator. Square root, clear it, square root of 80. And I see that it says 8.944. I'm going to for sure keep the 8.9, and then I have to decide, is that 4 enough to round up, or does it stay the same? And it stays the same because the number after it is not above 5. So 8.94 is approximately, yep, I wrote that down right, is approximately the correct answer. That is the distance between C and F. All right, let's try one more together. Calculate the distance between the points 1, -1 and 5, -8. Remember, my first step is to label x, y, x, y. Second step is to label. This is my first point, so I put 1s. This is my second point, so I put 2s. Then I'm going to copy down my formula. Square root of. Always go back to your formula and copy it down. So parentheses, x2, find it in the points, 5. Minus x1, 1 squared, plus y2 is -8, minus -1 squared. 5 minus 1 is a grand total of 4. -8 minus a -1 means I add 1, so that is -7 squared. Remember to times it by itself. 4 times 4 is 16. 7 times 7 is 49. Be careful about that negative. Put it in parentheses. That is equal to the square root of, all right, 16 plus 49. I'm not great at mental math. So 16 plus 49, 65. So the square root of 65. And I want to approximate to the nearest hundredth. So 2 decimal places. So I'm going to type it in my calculator. Square root of 65 is approximately 8.06, and yes, that 6 stays a 6 because the 2 is not high enough to make it any higher. So 8.06. Sorry, had to double check my answer. All right, if you have any questions, please reach out to your teacher and have a nice day.